think you should be seeing something coming up. There we are.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much. Welcome to this meeting of the East Lothian Integration Joint Board on the 8th of December 2022. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available as a webcast in order to allow the public access to the democratic process in East Lothian. East Lothian Council and NHS Lothian are the data controllers under the Data Protection Act 2018. Data collected as part of the recording will be retained in accordance with the Council and Health Board's policies on record retention. The webcast of this meeting will be publicly available for up to 6 months. I'll now begin with the roll call of attendees. And first of all, we have apologies from Councillor Lynn Jardine and from Claire Flanagan. Do members have any other apologies? No. I'll go through the roll call. If you could confirm you're present, please, when you hear your name. Shameen Akhtar.
Present.
Lachlan Bruce.
Present.
Carol McFarlane.
Present.
Elizabeth Gordon.
Present.
Fiona Ireland.
Present.
Peter Murray.
Present.
Val de Souza.
Present.
Thank you. Maureen Allen.
Present.
David Binney.
Present, and apologies, I need to leave at 3:15, depart from the meeting because of caring responsibilities.
Good, thanks, David. Philip Conaglan. Lorraine Cowan.
Lorraine's on annual leave. She should have sent her apologies, Fiona.
Okay, thank you. Wendy Hale. Claire McIntosh. Marilyn McNeil.
Here.
Thank you. Thomas Miller. No. Judith Tate.
Present.
Thank you. John Turville. No. I know we have John Hardman here today.
Yeah, present. I'm here instead of John Turville.
Thank you, John. Fiona Wilson.
Present. Sorry, slow mic.
Thank you. That's the roll call taken, and we can now move to declarations of interest. To any members with any declarations to make on any of the items? No, that's lovely. Thank you. And we can move on to the business now, Chair.
Thanks very much, and welcome, John. I think this is your first meeting, John. Am I correct in that?
I was present briefly in September, but I was on a train and John Turville was there at the same time. But yes, proper first meeting, I think. Thank you.
You're very welcome, John. And Chris, you're standing in for Claire.
Yeah, I am today.
Yeah, and just unlucky for you that there's 3 papers that Claire would have presented. Good timing from Claire.
Quite an agenda to pick up.
Yeah, look forward to your input in a moment. One quick announcement just for everybody's benefit that there's been a couple of requests in the recent past for people to attend as they might have had we been meeting in person at our normal venue, and we have looked into that, or others on my behalf have looked into that, and it really isn't practical for a range of reasons, and Laura might be able to explain that if we feel the need to, but there are a range of reasons why it's not possible. We are aware from a conversation, I'm aware from a conversation with Curry just minutes ago, that we are hoping to get into some kind of arrangement whereby we'll be back either in full or in part in person by the spring. So we may well have another meeting on Teams in full, but as I said to the people that have contacted me direct, and I think Laura may have said to others, that the meeting is, as you know, recorded. They can make contact prior to the meeting, having seen the agenda and papers with any of the members of the IJB to make comment through them. And equally, as I said to the gentleman who contacted me, that should he wish to make any comment afterwards, I would be more than happy to communicate with him after the meeting if you had any queries or questions. So that's just to sum that up. Laura, is there anything to add to that, or is that sufficient for today?
I think that's fine, that's clear.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. All right, we'll move on to the minute of the meeting of the 27th. I won't go through it page by page in terms of accuracy. I'll simply ask for anybody that has any issues on the accuracy to bring them to my attention and the page in which they're referring to. Not seeing any hands appear, so unless I've missed somebody, I will move on to the accuracy of the said agenda. And again, sorry, the matters arising from the agenda. And again, if anybody has any matters arising that are not on the agenda today, please indicate now if you can. No, I'm not. Oh, yeah, sorry, beg your pardon. Marlon.
Yes, did you want to know the topic?
Yes, please.
The crisis in the cost of living.
Okay, which page?
Oh, no, it's any other business, sorry.
All right, well, can we wait to the end, Marlon? We'll pick that up then.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Chair, but we don't have any other business on the agenda. Is this something that you want to make a statement on, Marilyn, or is it something that you want to draw to members' attention?
Just to draw to members' attention, yes.
Right. It might be something that we could do under Chair's report. Would that be all right, Peter?
Yeah, that'll be fine. So, Marlon, thank you, Fiona, for that. Marlon, if you bear with us, we've done the matters arising. I'll let you come in before I say a couple of words on my own input.
Okay, thank you.
Shameen, sorry, you had something in terms of the
Just
matters
on
arising.
page 3 on section 4, which was the last end of August financial update, and the bottom last sentence at the bottom of the page, it was about the sustainability payments, and it does tell us that they will cease on the 31st of March and that providers are aware. I just wondered if there was any other update on that, and if and are we aware of what impact that will have on the providers and what we're able to provide as a service and what we're not able to provide?
Okay, Laura, are you going to respond to that?
Just briefly, I suppose, so the providers are aware of the sustainability payments coming to an end, and they're actually only just now able to apply for social care fund for their staff. So the number of applications have reduced significantly, and are just for, they used to be for additional costs and other costs, now specifically just in relation to staff absence and paying for the social care fund. So we're seeing less come in, so providers should be geared up and ready to no longer be able to apply. Is there anything additional that we can offer? No, not at this time. Nothing else has come forward. But from our perspective, we're aware of 1 or 2 care at home providers that are finding it financially difficult, and we are supporting that and managing that. But none of the kind of larger homes or care at home providers have come to say that they are going to be under significant difficulty when the payments stop.
Does that address your query, Shameen?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I do think it's an important point to keep aware of, and any information, Laura, that does come your way, perhaps you be so good as to share it if that's appropriate when it comes into you. Thank you. Anything else before we move on to the next item? Not seeing anybody's hand apart from your own, Marlon, which we'll come to in a second. So can we move on, Fiona?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, item 2 is the Chair's report.
Yeah, I did cover the issue that I said I would with regard to the attendance. There is one other item that I want to bring to people's attention, and that is an event on trauma that's taking place in February. Laura, you're going to remind me what the date is. I don't have immediate access to it. But whilst you either find it or off the top of your head, tell me what it is. It's really just to remind people of the opportunity to attend and to encourage as much attendance as possible. I'm going to assume that everybody has seen the flyer. Is that a correct assumption? Yes. So you've all had sight of it, and it's something that I've actually been involved in to a little extent over probably the last 15 months. I think the lady's name is Laura James, who leads on it, and Laura's very passionate about this particular project, and I would encourage you when you either see the flyer, if you've not seen it so far, or you are now made aware of it, you refer to the flyer, I would urge you to put that in your diaries if you are available and feel that's something that would be of benefit to you. You don't have the date off the top of your head, Laura, do you?
I do now. It's the 17th of January, and Fiona Curry has sent that out to all members, so you will have that in your inboxes.
January, thank you. I thought it was February. Thank you for that assistance. One quick other points for Invite Marlon to come in. There was a meeting, as there has periodically been over the last 2 or 3 years, of what's known as the IJB Chairs and Vice Chairs Network. A couple of weeks ago. The reason I bring it to your attention is that it's the first one we've had in person, and we had 2 things that I think are of particular interest to us. One is that we had a gentleman called Ian McFarlane. For those that are well versed in their politics in Scotland, Ian was a shadow health minister back in the Labour Lib Dem administration. So Ian's participation was to, I think, make a plea, if that's not exaggerating it too much, that we ensure that the lived experience is something that IJBs are well versed in, and indeed where that is absent, that we seek to try to secure more input from those with lived experience. Now, clearly around the table, we've done a lot of communication of late on a number of different projects, and others will all have our view on whether or not the lived experience was drawn sufficiently into that consultations that took place. But I think it's something we should always be alert to, and I was encouraged by Ian's contribution, because he did remind us all of the importance of it, and clearly with the ongoing development of NCS, it's a key feature of that piece of work. So I just thought I'd bring that to your attention. And the second matter that is of some relevance is that following that meeting, we asked for comments from all IJBs on the current financial challenges that they're facing. We got a number of responses back from IJBs across Scotland, and we have fed them into the Scottish Government, which clearly has a potential impact on us in East Lothian. But you won't be surprised at the summary of issues that came forward with regard to the challenges of finance that I think we're all facing, either through the local authorities, through NHS funding for next year, or indeed for the work that's ongoing to try to secure our budget for 23-24, more of which will come, I'm sure, after Chris begins to present his reports. That's just a quick summary from me. I did see somebody's hand go up there. Judith, it was yourself.
Thanks very much, Peter. Just a couple of points on that. I think that your point about lived experience is really important. And I think if we're talking about becoming trauma informed across East Lothian, then actually having the voice of people with experience is going to be essential for us to really understand whether or not our systems, processes, our practice, our infrastructure, it really is trauma informed, and that we use that to assist us in making kind of shared decisions about how we design services, how we deliver services, and how we develop our communities. So I think that's important from that perspective. And the other one is in terms of our responsibilities to keep the promise. The promise is Scotland's national policy in response to the independent care review, and it has, obviously a number of relevances for adult services, because these are the services that are working with the children that are currently looked after. So hearing the voice of children, young people in the way we deliver services to parents is incredibly important. We have a champions board in East Lothian that taps into the voice of children who are currently looked after or are care experienced, and that is there as an available kind of structure and consultation engagement structure for our services. So it's yes, it's the right thing to do, and on a number of fronts, as was the points I would want to make. Thanks, Peter. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Judith. That's really helpful. A couple more hands have come up. So Val, you're first, I think, then Maureen.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. I think I understood you right. See the finance, the collation of the financial comments, if you like, for the from the network. Would it be possible to see the collated or the summary of those reports, just to see what the sort of national picture is, what the big issues are, whether that, you know, applies necessarily for us, but what the main issues are, particularly as it's gone to Parliament?
Yeah, it's going into the Scottish Government Integration Team, Val, just for accuracy. So we said that's my direct link in through the role of Chair of Chairs. So I said I would feed it back to them, but I'm happy to provide either as I did with them, the unedited version from all of the responses we received. I think we got with 7 or 8. I think that was the total number we got. Yeah. So I'm happy to either summarise those at some point over the next week, Val, and send them to you, or send them unedited. I'll have a think of what's best.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't want to put you to too much work on that, Peter, but sometimes it's good to just have that perspective of where do we sit and what are the other issues that are around, and are they the key ones for us or not? But that would be great. Anything but summarise it, Peter, would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll certainly do that. And Maureen.
Thanks, Peter. It was just coming back to the lived experience group. It's been decided kind of that it's quite a derogatory term, lived experience, but Pennypit, VSAIL and some of the council connected communities are working together with a group that is now being known as the Working for Change Collective. So that has lived experience people on it, and we're looking to speak to Carrie Ann through Judith's team to make sure that we're making the joins with them, but also making sure that we can take some of the learning that Carrie Ann has experienced. So again, it's just about avoiding duplication a lot of the time. So if there's already an organised vehicle there for people to tap into, I think that's good.
Can you give that title again, Maureen, please?
Sorry, it's the Working for Change Collaborative.
Working for Change. Right. Thank you very much. I didn't write it down properly. Thank you. It's helpful. Okay. A couple more hands. Laura, I think you were next, and then John.
Just a quick point, and sort of to remind all that within our strategic plan we are committed to the promise and to being trauma informed. So it's just a reminder for everyone that is in there, and is something we are very conscious of.
Thanks, Laura. That's helpful. And John, I think you're last.
Just a final extra perspective on the lived experience thing. My work in teaching GPs how to care for people who use drugs over the last year introduced me to the additional terminology of people with living experience as well as lived experience, because having experienced it in the past but now moved on and moved into recovery gives you a perspective, but it often changes your perspective. And if we're designing services to suit people who are going through the process of whatever trauma or illness they're in, then we have to be aware that their current needs are the ones we need to meet, not necessarily the needs that people perceive once they're recovered.
Thanks, John. Again, another helpful contribution. Well, your hand's still up. Is it Alexia, or are you going to come back in? Well, your hand's still up. Are you going to come back in? Just to summarise then, thank you for all those helpful contributions to that discussion. If anyone has any other views they wish to share on whether or not as an IJB, and if you don't mind, Maureen, I'll use the lived experience just for want of a better description for now. If anyone has any views on how we could do that better or differently, I'd certainly happily hear them, just by way of my own education in this front. And I'm sure that there'll be strong views that we are pretty conversant with it. But if there's anything that people think we could do differently or better in that regard, then please let me know. Okay, Marlene, you'll be very patient. So if you don't mind, if you want to come in now.
Yeah, everybody's obviously aware of the crisis in the cost of living, and many families in East Lothian are affected by this. When I've gone around to the area partnership meetings, there's an incredible range of activities and resources and things that they're doing to try and avert the crisis when people are in crisis, to give them something to tide over with for a few days until they can get themselves together. Or there's food banks and community kitchens, a whole range of things. And I was just wondering whether the IJB members would be aware of all of these, and whether it might be an idea to have the area partnership chairs possibly to a meeting to describe the range of activities so that we would know what's going on. And I guess the other thing is there anything that the IJB thinks it can actually do that's appropriate in relation to this? It may be just giving recognition to what's already being done. That's
Thanks, Mal. I'll let Maureen go in a second, but on your first point with regard to whether or not they come and present, can you let myself, Sinead and Fiona have a chat about that and just see how best that might be facilitated? So I'll give an undertaking to do that, Mal, and that satisfies that particular point for now. And Maureen, what you come in and think on the wider points?
I'm really conscious that obviously that I'm totally agreeing with Marlon what she's saying, but I think Paolo or Lucy Higginson would be the best place to give you an overview exactly what's happening round about the poverty and cost of living agenda through the poverty working group, which I think Christine Johnston sits on, Laura. So we had a meeting yesterday and went through the poverty conference that obviously VCL hosted, and we pulled together quite a large document of comments and potential solutions and actions. That's maybe something that I should share with this group as well. But definitely, I think Paolo, rather than directly going to the area partnerships, because they have got a really good handle on all the services, because we all feed into that group.
that sounds great.
I think Sinead wants to add something to that, Marlon.
Thank you. And Marilyn, as councillors, we received an update because we wanted to find out, to pull together all of East Lothian Council's work on the Poverty Action Plan and what we were doing to support people in our local communities on the cost of living crisis. So we've got a summary version of that. So if that would be helpful to circulate that, then I'm sure we're happy to do that.
Would that work, Marlon, for you in terms of the concerns you've raised?
That sounds excellent. Yes.
Okay. So, Sinead, will you undertake to get somebody to do that? Maureen, you want to go back in, or was your hand raised?
It was just to say that we have just distributed £37,000 through the cost of living fund with the council to support the food bank, fair share, and the local community pantries to, buy essentials for the community. So again, it's to kind of put some perspective around things that, again, every area has been subsidised with that fund. So there's something in every locale.
Well, I think it's reassuring to know of the various actions and the things which you're saying are summarised in these documents. I myself wasn't aware of the wide range of things, and I think it would be worthwhile to have them circulated, or maybe I think it's Paolo coming rather than the area partnership chairs. I was just wondering, whether that would be a possibility, but it sounds like Paolo might have more of an overview of what's happening in the whole of East Lothian.
Yeah, we'll pick that up, Marlon, if that's okay, and we'll decide, whether or not there's added benefit to attending an IJB as you suggested. But if you don't mind, I will come back to you on that one between now and the next meeting, and I'll have a chat with Sinead and Fiona, as I said, see how best to prosecute that. But I think this point you've made, which is really connecting IJB to the crisis you've outlined is the fact that it has got a direct impact on people's health and well-being. So, you know, there are strong relationships between the things that you've outlined as concerns and the work that Fiona and our team and others oversee and the social care that's provided throughout East Lothian. So, you know, I think it's a useful reminder and prompt for us to connect the things together and be aware of the way you've described. So thank you for raising it, Marlon.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, happy to move on. Yeah, so next agenda item, Fiona, please.
The next item is item 3, which is the 2022-23 quarter 2 financial update, and it's Chris King who'll be presenting the report.
Hi, Chris. Chris, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but obviously we've all had a chance to read it. So if a summary of the salient points would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely fine. I'll just take you through it now. So this paper is the Q2 paper. The aim of it is to outline and highlight the results from both of the partners, so East Lothian Council and NHS Lothian's quarter 2 financial reviews. Now, the information is based up to sort of the end of September and provides a projection for a financial outturn at the end of the year. So the quarter 1 financial review position for the IJB was a projected overspend of 1.1 million. The good news is that there's been an improvement in the position, and the quarter 2 financial review projects a close to break-even position for the IJB. There's a small overspend of 92,000. From the paper, you can see that there's still 2 main pressure areas, one of which is set-aside services within the NHS, and the other is the social care budgets. Now, for set-aside, the main financial pressures are driven by medicine costs and the increased reliance we have just now on supplementary staffing to support workforce gaps. Now, that's both medical staff and nursing. Within social care, the overspend is predominantly related to the local authority pay settlement. East Lothian Council have confirmed that the IJB will receive a share of the 140 million national funding. Therefore, it's just the unfunded element that's generating the overspend. Now, that in itself is about 300,000. We'll continue to closely monitor the forecast, especially moving into winter. There are still some risks that we've not included in the modelling. So just to highlight those, so one is the NHS pay settlement. This hasn't been concluded yet. And then there's also an ongoing issue with East Lothian Council regarding transport costs within the learning disabilities budgets. Now, the last section of the paper just sort of highlighted some issues around COVID. So back in October, I think there's an update that came to the IJB, sort of detailing the Scottish Government were looking to reclaim any surplus IJB COVID reserves. Now, we are still awaiting the full correspondence on this. However, we continue to routinely report our COVID expenditure up to Scottish Government. Our last return was at quarter 2, and at this point we anticipated there would be around 5.2 million of costs across both partners. And that would have left us a balance just short of 4 million. Just to refresh you, there are four main areas that we're still supporting with COVID funding. So in the NHS, that is the additional wards that we have open in East Lothian Community Hospital and the additional costs in primary care, predominantly prescribing. Within social care, it's all around sustainability payments and the loss of income. In terms of risk now then, the main thing to note is that we've been made aware that East Lothian Council Finance Department continued to be in business continuity. And just wanted to highlight the risk that this might have on the IJB's delegated social care budgets. I think this risk has now been added to the IJB risk register as well. So I suppose that's the key points for the paper, and then the recommendation for the board was just to note the output of the quarter 2 financial reviews.
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you. And well, Fiona's got her hand up for a question, but if Karen, Fiona, before you come in, I'd be keen to hear a bit more about the transport issue, Chris, and a bit more about the potential impact of the business continuity work. So I'll just let you think about that for a moment while Fiona poses that question to you.
So it's not so much a question, Peter, actually. It was just that the Audit and Risk Committee just the other day, and it might even be this week, we received that new risk onto the risk register around the finance in the council partnership, part of the partnership, remaining in business continuity. And what we discussed was the need for a bit more detail around that risk, and particularly around the mitigations that we might have against that risk going forwards, and the impact of that risk. So it did get quite a comprehensive discussion at Audit and Risk Committee. So just to firm that one up. The second point, and I think, you know, maybe I'm becoming like a broken record, but at 3.4, you know, we're still seeing a considerable overspend arising from the set aside budgets, but we know that we're being allocated a percentage of that set aside overspend, which is not attributed to our actual usage, but to a proportion simply by virtue of our population. And we know we're probably not using that to that extent, and we're therefore, I suppose, we're in a worse position because of that. And I think that the work that was being looked at in terms of using actuals rather than that percentage would be helpful for us in future financial years. And I think we should be really pushing on that one. And finally, the IJB COVID reserves, and I understand the requirement for the return. I think we need to be very clear going into 23-24, the impact, because I can't see us necessarily being able to close down the services that we're providing with that, and that is, you know, so we need to understand the implications of that for next year's budget, because that's clearly where our overspend is going to come in from the start of the year.
Thanks, Fiona. I think there is an important point around the accuracy of the set aside, because I think what Fiona's alluding to, for those that are not aware, is that when I think pre-COVID, when Susan Goldsmith was still in finance lead, she was looking at the very thing that Fiona has described, which was almost individually costing the cost of, in this case, East Lothian costs attributed to anything within the acute. Now that work stalled for reasons that I'm not entirely familiar with at this juncture, but I'm happy, Fiona, to ask that question just to see where we are, just to give some feedback to this group on the very point you've made. So, Chris, I'll pick up that point if that's okay, in terms of seeking a response on that. Do you want to make any comment on anything else that Fiona's said?
So just around the COVID reserves, I think we all share that anxiety. The good news is we have done a fair bit of sort of exit planning. Now, our biggest risk in terms of that sort of COVID tail is going to be the wards in the community hospital. Now, there's ongoing discussions within NHS Lothian with Fiona and Callum around the future of the wards. But it's just to say that it is on the radar. I think we are aware of the risk there.
Want to come back, Fiona?
Yeah, I just was.
Oh, sorry, I was
no,
going to say,
no,
I'm sure
no,
we
no.
are. I'm sure we are on. I know it's on the radar. I think it just needs to be docked in the IJB as well. I think we just need to be very clear that it's a concern at this level as well.
It was very fair that you come in, Fiona, because it did sound as if I was inviting you to come in. So now's your turn.
Now's my turn. That's fine. So I think that it's a really helpful point, Fiona, and I think we've worked hard. Ward 6, with our work around kind of unscheduled care, delayed discharge, home first, we've managed to reduce the need for beds in 6. And that fits with our strategic plan, and we would want to do the same, I think, around 5. But I guess we've got to do it in the context around of what's palatable and that supports the system, as well as kind of fits what's strategic for us. So I think it is really important to raise it, but I am keen that we are still striving to do what we do around that kind of home first approach and getting people to the right pathway, and balance it around kind of good financial management of grip and control where we can. And I suppose if there's an ask that comes from the wider system, we just need to demonstrate our efficiency for the good and person-centred approach and care, as well as kind of supporting that wider system, if that makes sense. So we're kind of working it like that, being ready.
Thanks, Fiona. Chris, do you want to make any comment on the questions I posed with regard to detail on the transport debate and issue, and probably less so now on the business continuity, but some confidence that that doesn't impact negatively on our information sources, which is the key point I think I'm concerned about.
No, absolutely. And I'll be honest, Peter, I'm not particularly close to this detail, but I do know there are ongoing discussions between Claire as CFO and Sarah as lead council finance. I'd maybe ask that I take this back to Claire and get her to come back and give you a fuller, more comprehensive update. Would that be okay?
Well, Fiona's got to come in, so I'll let Fiona come in and then we'll decide which course of action is best. Fiona?
So on the transport, Chris is absolutely right. Claire and I have met regularly with Sarah and Claire, formally with CFO to CFO. I think we just need to reach an agreement on transport, but there's a recognition we need to do that. So I'm hopeful that will be done shortly. With regard to the risk, we have flagged it and we were keen. That's why we were keen to put on the risk register. Sarah Fortune, CFO, has assured us that the IJB will be a priority, but we want to make sure that we're getting the level of detail we need that supports the IJB, but also again down to the teams that deliver the service. So I have asked the question, and Claire and Chris are monitoring it, and we'll flag if there's a change to that. But we have had assurance from Sarah Fortune.
Perhaps, Chris, in the first instance, just pick up on your suggestion that you can advise Claire on a return that myself and Siobhan would welcome any update on those two issues. And I think that would be the best way to progress it for now. And if we feel there's a need to communicate in any way with the wider IJB, then we'll do that. Siobhan?
It was just a question on something else.
No, you go.
Is that okay? No, thank you. Thanks, Chris, for the report. It was just to ask around 3.7, which is around the IJB COVID reserves. I know that that's something that we have to do, but I think knowing that our challenges and our demographic growth, I think when money's been taken away, it's always an issue of concern. So I absolutely agree of having real oversight of what the impact of that will be, but it says we await further correspondence on the detail of this. I just wondered if you had any timescale, because we're in December now, if you had any timescale for that, and also if you're aware of what other authorities are doing, what or is everybody doing the same thing, or are people taking different positions on it? And I suppose just as a comment, not for you to comment on, Chris, but just on the finances that we talked about earlier, I suppose it's helpful for people to know that every chief executive of finance, a local authority chief executive of finance, all 32 of them have written to the government of the challenges and pressures they face. And I think in 10 years of being a council, that's unprecedented. I've never seen any coordinated efforts like that before. So I suppose that shows you the pressures in the whole system and other parts of the system that we, as a health and social care partnership, we rely on supporting, because those people need to go home in a safe, secure home, etc. And the other one was around the most recent Audit Scotland report, which outlined that the Scottish Government had an underspend of 2 billion. And I just wondered whether there might be any movements in the Scottish Government budget. But that's not for you to comment. It was just as a general information wise, but it was more about the guidance.
So I'll start with the second point. As far as I'm aware, we're all in the same boat. Certainly all of the HSCPs or IJBs in Lothian. Now, in terms of timelines, Scottish Government, I think, reached out last week saying that there will be a sort of, for lack of a better term, a bit of a mop-up exercise in Q4, where we'll submit our final COVID projections for the year, and then they were going to sort of work out what balances were left. So that's what we're working to just now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks for your other observations. I'm sure we'll follow that particular Audit Scotland report with interest in terms of the reported underspend. Val.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I'm just thinking about again the reserves and the additional beds that were open, and I guess I'm sort of thinking they may have been opened, and it may have been to do with COVID. And it may turn into the fact that we need the capacity in terms of the flow around the system as we go forward. So I wonder if we should be making a point about the impact of withdrawing that money, and just really, you know, sort of, I suppose, making the point that things have changed and things will move on, but actually maybe taking a view on our own assessment of the need for those beds and maybe the change of usage, but going back to the flow and the whole system and the whole impact around Lothian. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Val. Ian, did you put your hand up in response to that question?
Yeah, it was just to say that is something which we're working with Craig Marriott on. So there's a number of beds open across the whole Lothian system, including Ward 5 within ELCH, all of which funded through COVID. I think the total is about 134 beds roughly across the system, all of which would come to a close at the end of March, and that would have a significant impact on NHS Lothian. So we are working with them about the longer term impacts for us, specifically for Ward 5, Val, and that's one of the things we've clocked against that reserve position.
When might we know the outcome to that, Ian, in terms of 23-24 planning?
So I think operationally, we'll need a little bit more time to work that through, but the my understanding is that one of the things we're waiting for is the December budget statement. So the 15th of December will be the UK budget statement, I think, which will then come through to the Scottish position, and then we'll get an indication of next year's funding. And from an IJB perspective, I think it'll be tied to our offer from NHS Lothian for next year. So I think we'd be looking at early next year for confirmation of those levels of funding.
Okay, so that's just the 15th, isn't it? Yeah, 15th of December. Okay, any other questions? Ian, have you got another point now?
No, sorry, I've got my hand on.
Anything else on this paper? Because it's just for noting, so we don't need a roll call, Fiona, I think. No. So are we happy just to note the content of this paper and thank Chris for his input to this one? Yeah. Okay, Fiona, we'll move on to the next one, please.
Thank you. Item 4 is the East Lothian IJB medium-term financial plan for 22-23 through to 26-27.
Good.
Perfect. So me again. So the purpose of this report is to provide the board with a medium-term rolling sort of 5-year financial plan. The plan covers the current 22-23 financial year and then spans to 26-27. The process of developing a medium-term financial plan is in line with previous years. The plan is driven by each partner's local plans and is developed in line with the Scottish Government's medium-term financial framework. The output of the modelling sort of further outlines the financial challenges we'll be facing. So in 23-24, the initial projections show that we'll have a pressure of circa 4.7 million. Now, this equates to about 3% of our budget. Unfortunately, the bad news is this incrementally steps up until 26-27, when the gap is estimated to be circa 14 million, and that equates to 8%. The rolling plan is based on formal budget offers for 22-23 and then indicative budgets for the remaining years. The East Lothian Council budget letter for 22-23 only included budget in year, and then we've just assumed flat cash for the next 4 years. The only other assumption to the East Lothian Council budget was around the share of the 140 million. Again, just wanted to highlight that we will get an allocation, we will get a share of that, but it doesn't meet the total increase in costs. So there is a financial pressure. Similar to East Lothian Council, NHS Lothian's budget offer only included the in-year budget, therefore indicative budgets have been used for future years. The assumption in there is that there is an uplift of funding of around 2% from Scottish Government that is then passed through. So that's the budget side of it. In terms of the expenditure projections, so future NHS Lothian costs within the financial plan are based on the detailed financial planning exercise conducted by Lothian. COVID costs have now been included in the baseline for the IJB. This is prescribing only. It's about 500,000. This is the first iteration of the financial plan. It is likely to be refined as more information becomes available, and it should be finalised in early 2023. Once NHS Lothian have finalised their financial plan, we will take that and refine the IJB plan. For East Lothian Council, a starting position of baseline expenditure was used, so the £334,000 overspend from the Q2 position. There was a couple more assumptions built into the modelling, so a 2% uplift was used for pay and 3% was used for demographic growth. Now, this element of spend would cover different types of expenditure, but in particular it would be things like transitions, so children moving into adult services. And you can see in the table in the paper, this equates to about 1.3 to 1.4 million each year. So at this stage, moderate assurance can be given around the IJB's ability to break even in 22-23. There is a significant financial challenge on the horizon, and therefore a clear and real need to develop financial recovery plans. And there are two recommendations, and it was to note two separate things. So firstly, the output from the first iteration of the financial plan, and to note the financial challenges facing the IJB in future years. And secondly, to note the future work required to refine this financial plan and the requirement for significant recovery actions to bring the plan back into balance. So I feel that was a bit of a whirlwind, but it's unfortunately not great news for the projections going forward.
Okay, Chris, thank you. Before I invite any questions, just a couple of comments for you to consider, and we might come back on to once you've asked for any other points or questions. There's nothing on inflation in terms of cost pressures that might be based on current inflationary levels, might be worth taking into account, if that's not already factored in somewhere else. I think your pay projections are extremely ambitious at 2%. Can't imagine that being a figure that people will settle on in 23-24 unless there's a significant and immediate drop in inflationary pressures. And maybe for Laura, I don't know if this is you or not, Laura, but Paul, I'd be interested to see if our annual plan, delivery plan for the strategy in 23-24 is actually going to be realised with that budgetary constraint, and if there's any need to consider that by way of making sure that the strategy, when it's published, is not going to reflect an ambition that we can't realise because there's financial constraint. So that's my questions. Anything from anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to I guess emphasize the point just that Chris is making around kind of recovery actions. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have got good recovery plans in place, given that the last 2 years when we felt quite a lot of money was being thrown and readily available, it's quite a change. So we're pushing on the recovery actions with our planning so that we know that the difficult decisions we need to start making or considering as part of that. So rather than waiting, trying to be one step ahead.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. Yes, thank you for that. Well,
yeah, I'm sort of trying to formulate my thoughts here. It's challenging, isn't it? So, but it's really good to have this. So thank you to Chris and to Claire and Fiona for bringing this forward. I suppose I would zone in a little bit on the transitions issues, because I think often that's just been a clear, you know, that's a childcare budget, this is an adult budget, and kind of wonder if there needs to be a more sharing of costs and sharing of that strategy, and a little bit of fudging or blending those budgets and responsibilities. So that's just a comment or suggestion. I guess some of the local authority finance people might not be so happy about that, but I mean, there is an element of we need to see those smoother transitions for individuals and their families. So actually, I always think the finance should come after the strategy, if you like. So if we have it right for our people, then the money should follow that. So that was one thing. The other thing, and maybe I'm grasping at straws here, I have three comments. The second one is, I just saw something today around the co-design workshops or methodology that's going to be used for the National Care Service, and I guess one of the things that you really can't really figure, you can't feature in some of these financial projections so easily is any new monies or anything else that might come in to help us. And I'm just thoughtful about could we anticipate that there might be some movement, some resource around that, some of that, and if there isn't, could we ask for it? So the third point, which is probably a little bit related, is sort of getting the balance between the recovery plans is absolutely necessary, as Fiona says, but also about not losing our priorities. So what are our priorities? And I suppose it goes back to maybe Peter's point about the strategic plan. So what are the things that we're absolutely not going to let go of? And I suppose within that, it's just sort of linking the golden thread between the priorities, the new policy areas, and some of the more traditional ways that we do business, a wee bit like the transitional stuff. So a bunch of comments in there, folks. I'm not sure I've come to the end of them, but I've come to the end of my thinking time on that one. So thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Val. Ian put his hand up when you started to speak, so I'm going to assume that he's got something to say, or at least just
That's the second time he's done that. I think Ian and I are going to have to go into a cupboard together.
I can't wait. I can't wait. I was actually just to say, and this is a really good point you've raised about the transitions, because Shameen later on this afternoon is going to be launching the Teens Plus service within East Lothian, which was part of our transition programme. So part of our transformation programme for adults with complex needs. And we've been trying to drive to increase the local services rather than building-based services for adults with complex needs. And part of what we're doing today around this launch is Teens Plus, the service that we've traditionally accessed from Edinburgh, and we've been able to commission it into East Lothian. So that's happening today, and is all about it's trying to support those arrangements for transition. Now, Judith's on the call, so I have to say this. I don't think there is much scope for us getting money from that transition arrangement from children's services to adult services. There's just frankly far too much pressure on the children's position. But I do think there is more we can do through our transformation work, and this has already started, around looking at our transitions policy and thinking about how we work together with children's services for that longer term offer for families, so that we're not in that situation of a lot of promises happening when someone's 15, 16, and then suddenly coming into a very different world of adult services when they're 18, 19. So I think we've been working closely with children's social work services on our transition policy, and we're trying to finalise that. But actually what's hopefully going to come out, and we should be able to do this really well soon, is say over the next 5 years, who's moving from children's to adult services, and how do we make that seamless, and how do we understand the ask of that transition? So we're in the middle of all of that, Val, and I'm very happy to have a conversation offline with it. Shannon, Leslie and Gillian Neal would be two other people who could talk much more eloquently than I could about it.
Is that okay, Val?
Yeah.
Judith?
Thanks. Sorry, trying to get my hand down. I think that's really helpful, and that's right, Ian. And I think it's whilst it feels like lots of promises in children's world, it's about duties of what we need to provide in order to keep children kind of safe and with their families where possible and supported. So it's we're not comparing like with like, and we absolutely appreciate that. So absolutely on board with Ian in terms of better planning and planning ahead. Certainly there's a lot of work happening in children's services about future proofing those plans for children, thinking about what can we do at 13 that will help maximise their independence at 25, and that's an important theme of work. The other piece of work that's just starting is I guess a refresh of our approach to autism, because some of the children, young people with most complex needs, most risky needs to themselves and others, are children with autism for which our offer is not as robust as it needs to be. And again, that it will be, you know, is an area of transition along with those with autism and neurodiversity and learning disabilities as well. So absolutely on the page with that. And there was transition work also ongoing with NHS Lothian, but I'm not very sure where that big piece of work has got to. I think Gillian might be involved in it, but I haven't been of late. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Is that final point, Judith, is that something that you think we need to revisit?
I think we are visiting it. I think it started and then it stalled a bit. I'm not entirely clear what the outcomes of that are intended to be. I know that Gillian attended the last of those meetings, so it might be worth just refreshing ourselves with an update on the intentions of that.
We'll note that in a minute, Judith, if that's okay, in terms of hopefully pulling that out before the next meeting, but at least at the next meeting getting some feedback on that very point. I think it'd be helpful for everybody to understand that a bit more. Shireen?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for the report. But I think looking at it, it's just really challenging and very difficult. And I think one of the things we have to just keep doing, finding every avenue and an opportunity, is to really home in on our population growth. And you know, we're very different from other authorities. And one stark figure at an NHS Lothian board meeting, which I wrote down, was 84% of the population growth is going to take place in the Lothians. 84%, you know, that is just staggering. And then if you home in down into, for us in East Lothian, the number of people aged over 65 is forecast to grow by 72% between 2012 and 2037. So I think, you know, from the social work officer's report, you can see, you know, the level of demand on services and the increase in referrals from children's services, etc. So you can see that, you know, services are really pressurised. So I think, understand we have to look at ways to try and work efficiently and differently, and that we should be doing that all the time. But I think we have to keep raising this issue as well, that, you know, it's got to be a stage where there's got to be some level of recognition of this growth, and just not seeing that in the system at the moment, and taking every opportunity that we've got to keep highlighting that to the policymakers and decision makers, that, you know, this is the context that we're working with within East Lothian, and, you know, they need to recognise that.
Shireen, just this morning, just by way of a very brief update, I met, as I do weekly, with Callum and John, the chair and chief executive of NHS Lothian, and in respect of the point you just made about population growth, they are expecting it to tip over into 1 million people in the Lothians relatively soon, and that figure of 84% you've just cited needs to be matched with capital provision as much as it does other services that will no doubt follow. So that was the context of the conversation this morning, just to kind of round it off a bit, that it's not only just about making sure that the services are right, but there'll be other facets to that debate that needs to go on and keep the pressure where it rightfully belongs, which is where the population growth is, and the demand increases are to follow. So thank you for raising that, Shireen. Chris, any comment on the points I made with regard to pay, inflation, and anything from MD on the strategic alignment?
Yeah, so if we go back to the pay uplift percentage, you are right. We've gone for quite a low percentage for this first cut. We did try and remodel it around 5% of an uplift, and the pressure that sort of popped out in 26-27 was about 17 million. The really tricky bit for us is we're assuming flat cash, but then you're showing your cost base going up, and it's trying to manage that to make sure that the plan is still meaningful. In terms of inflation, we do have an element in there just now. That'll be refined quite heavily. at the start of next year. We'll work with both partners and really follow their sort of working assumptions on it.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question, because if you look at the line in Appendix 1, non-pay inflation, it shows for 23-24 about a quarter of the 22-23 figure. I just don't think that that's realistic.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and we will refine this, Peter. This was just the initial modelling for it.
Yeah. Okay. Any comment, Laura or Paul, on the alignment with or the considerations, or have you fully considered the impact on the ability to deliver against the new strategic plan and the figures that Chris is outlining here?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose. Oh, sorry, Paul. Do you want to come in? Paul, did you want to come in, or?
I'll come in after you, Laura. See what you say first.
All right. So no, I mean, Val summed it up really. I mean, I suppose we've got our clear strategic objectives. A lot of what we're doing is remodeling and redesigning within our available budget to try and improve and expand the services that we are delivering and to kind of hone them in. So it came up when we were discussing the risk register as well. I think we've had that in our sights. I think we're well aware of our budget. So, and I would be keen that we are committed to that. We've got clear strategic objectives, and we've got clear budgets around those. So yes, I wasn't seeing that as a risk, but others may have other thoughts.
Okay, I'll let Paul come in just in case he wants to add to that before we might come in.
All I would add is that it's our intention to more closely monitor progress against the plan and its priorities. So we will, during the life of the plan, be looking at progress against the various commitments we've made, and we'll have to include all the context in that, financial, staffing and other, and we will report back to the IJB on where that finds us.
Yeah, okay, thanks both. Ian, final comment from you?
It was to note that I think at the moment we are okay, but I do think we're entering into a very different place financially than we ever probably have been. And I think we'd be fooling ourselves if there wasn't going to be significant changes, both in terms of infrastructure provision and service delivery over the next 2 years. And it will be a case of how we respond to that. Now, through the pandemic, we've had great examples of ensuring being able to deliver things like the transformation programme in line with delivering a strategy that gave more services at a reduced cost. But I do think the scale of some of the changes in our ambition to, for example, give people more choice, more control with services closer to home will be very hard to deliver within the financial envelope we have. I'm not sure we're at a fixed position yet on the capital provision longer term as well, which could have implications for things like our provisioning strategy. So I think our ability to deliver things like the care at home services that we want to, with services that people can choose close to their home, is at risk because of the financial position. I think a provisioning strategy is potentially at risk under that. And we've had a lot of discussions at the moment around primary care and the intentions we have around the development of primary care services in line with the primary care improvement plan. There is a lack of funding out there to deliver these multidisciplinary services across the whole of Scotland. We've done well in East Lothian, but I do think what we've presented today aligns with our strategy, but over the coming probably next 12 months, some more of that situation may unfold, and we may have to consider what that means for us.
Yeah, you're raising an interesting point, just to sum up, that I attended a development session of Edinburgh IJB yesterday where they were talking about their strategic plan, and the debate was on the match between finance and human rights and how you square the circle of allowing people the choices that you might argue follow from a human rights approach to the ability to support that financially. And it was an honest discussion. It was a helpful discussion. It's maybe something we want to consider at some point, because I think it does tease out some of those challenges that you've just alluded to. Okay, I think we're seem to be finished on this paper here, which again is just for noting, I think, Fiona. Yep, so we'll move on if that's okay, everybody.
Yeah, if members are happy to note the paper, that's fine. Yep. We can move on to item 5, which is the SIPFA Financial Management Code for 21-22, and I think Chris is also presenting this.
You will be sick of my voice after this. So this last paper is a short and fairly simple update on the Financial Management Code. It's produced by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountants, also known as SIPFA. Ultimately, the code is designed to support good practice. A lot of this is already embedded in the way we work, but there are some key principles that they outline. So organizational leadership, demonstrating a clear strategic direction, there's accountability, transparency, adherence to professional standards, sources of assurance are recognised. This includes things like the results of internal and external audits, and the long-term sustainability of local services is at the heart of all financial management processes. This proposal has been discussed at the IJB's Audit and Risk Committee, and the outcome of that was the Audit and Risk Committee are recommending the IJB support the adoption of the code in as far as it relates to the IJB. And that is really the update for this one. The recommendation of the paper is to note the output from Audit and Risk and to agree to adopt the code officially.
Thank you, Chris. I think it's quite uncontroversial, but I will let you be the judge of that. Does anybody have any questions or comments they want to make? It makes perfect sense to follow the good guidance, some good examples on the table. So, Val.
Yeah, just really quickly, yeah, endorse it. Think it's really good. And I think if we sign up to it as an IJB, we could well use some of the elements and principles in here in our, I'm not going to say in our defence, but use them positively with some of the financial management as we go forward, as cited by SIFCA. I think Chris is nodding, but I think the more evidence we have for transparency, accountability, these kind of principles, I think it can give us some strength. So I'm very much in favour. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, good points, Val. Chris, any response to that, or happy just to note that comment?
Just happy to take note.
Anything else from anybody? There is an element of this that requires the roll call, I think, Fiona, is that correct?
That's right, yes. If I could ask members just to give their general agreement to note the consideration and recommendation to the IJB from the Audit and Risk Committee. You're happy to note that? And then, thank you. And then there'll be a roll call vote on the recommendation that the IJB agree to adopt the code. So if you could indicate your vote, please. Shameen Akhtar.
Support.
Lachlan Bruce. Lachlan, are you still with us? I'll come back to you. Elizabeth Gordon.
Support.
Fiona Ireland.
Support.
Carol McFarlane.
Support.
Peter Murray.
Support.
Val de Souza.
Support.
And Lachlan, are you with us? No, I can't see. I don't think he is. So I'll leave his vote just now, but that recommendation is approved unanimously, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Chris. You're now off the hook for a little while.
We're happy to move on now to item 6, which is the Health and Social Care Partnership branding.
Hi, everyone. Jennifer, yeah.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I've not kind of spoken to you all before, so let me introduce myself first of all. So I'm Jennifer Jarvis and I joined the partnership about 6 months ago as the Senior Communications Advisor, and my colleague Gary King, who is the partnership's content officer, is also on the call today. As part of the kind of communication remit that we were asked to have a look at when we first joined was to consider the branding that is currently available for the partnership. So Gary and I have had a look at that, and we've also kind of done a review of some of the other partnership branding that is out there as well across the country. Now I know that you've all kind of read the report, so I'm not necessarily going to go into much detail about the background of kind of branding, what that represents to everything else. But it is more than just the logo and the identity. It brings everything together in terms of the way in which we communicate our messages to our intended audiences. And given that we are taking a hybrid from both East Lothian Council and NHS Lothian, and coming together, and we wanted to be reflective of both of those identities and both of those kind of brand values, mission statements, visions, and the way in which they communicate themselves as well. As detailed on point 3.2, we have an existing identity which I believe has been in place and since the start of the East Lothian Health and Social Care Partnership, which includes a variety of different kind of logos and icons that are kind of put underneath it. But if I were to ask individually each one of you what they all represent, I would suggest that you're going to have some difference of opinion that's going to come back and forth. So one of the things that we've been asked to do is to think about the identity, how we can create a fresh, modern approach, and that is reflective of the partnership. And within the appendix, we've given you more of a detailed kind of presentation outline as to how we actually came about and presented the new logo identity, which is detailed there in 3.4. What I want to say is, like, this motif that's been put together, we call them kind of pretzels that come together, that fold in, and this is to identify and represent the two partnerships from East Lothian Council and from NHS Scotland that are coming together. Again, we've had some discussion with this internally within the team and also with the general managers and the strategic management team, and we received some feedback on colours and different versions that we had initially kind of presented. And we have now reflected that into this change that links back to the other logo and also is reflective of the brand identity of both NHS Lothian and East Lothian Council. So in terms of kind of rollout, as part of this kind of proposal, we're asking you to consider the new identity and to agree, if you will, to that we can adopt this going forward. One of the things that I want to kind of make specific reference to, and since we've had 3 presentations from Chris today on finance, I think it's really important that I stress this, is that in terms of kind of the brand identity and logo, the creation of this has been done in-house. There has not been any external branding. There's not been any agencies that has done this. This has been kind of Gary and with the assistance of our graphics designer within East Lothian Council, who has created this logo. Also going forward as well, it's our suggestion that we will take a drip feed approach, in that we will introduce the new branding and the new identity on a rolling basis. We would start electronically, kind of make up different versions of kind of branded stationery, kind of logos, identity, things like that. And then in time, as we go through a natural recycle of replacement, we would go on to kind of larger things that are pre-printed branded materials, as I know that there are many teams that already have printed materials out there at the moment. So it would be a natural kind of cycle of replacement. This would mean that there would be 2 kind of identities that would exist for the kind of the first 6 to 12 months of 2023, but then in time we would hope to be able to replace that. If you look at East Lothian Council, if you look at NHS Lothian, they've taken a similar approach when they've updated their logos and identities in the past as well. So in terms of kind of financial costs that we've talked in there about 8.1, those are expected to be limited, but I'm not going to say that there's not going to be any costs at all, because obviously there will be in time, but we would like to think that that can be done as a part of a natural progression. So Appendix 1, it gives you the pitch presentation, which gives you an outline as to how we've come up with these concepts and the kind of the background before it. And Appendix 2 gives you a bride guidelines document, which we would be issuing out to all colleagues so that they would be able to adopt this going forward. So what we're asking for from the IJB at this moment in time is to consider the proposal of adapting a new identity and the guidelines, and to kind of formally make your recommendation that we can go ahead and start implementing this from January 2023.
Thank you, Jennifer. When I read this, I was actually really impressed with the thoroughness of it. I thought you put together a nice piece of work and at relatively little cost, which I think is even more impressive. These things cost a fortune. So for me anyway, I think well done, but I'll allow others to make their own views known on it. I think it's very thorough, and you've covered the ground really well. Elizabeth.
Thanks. I think it looks really good. I think the team have done a great job here, and I think tying in the colours from the old logo to the new one is a good idea, and also the fact that it's instantly recognisable and adaptable for the various different uses in terms of like business cards, social media, etc. So I think it looks really good, and also the use of the font that you've chosen as well, and reasons for that. So no, I would really support this, and I think the graduated approach to introducing it sounds really sensible, particularly in the current climate, and I think anything else would be financially irresponsible. So I think that sounds like an excellent course of action.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. It's good helpful comments. Anybody else want to add anything to what's been said? No, it looks like your background work, Jennifer, has succeeded, hopefully as well as you thought it might. So
let me include Gary King on this as well. So I don't know whether he's I can't see his profile picture because the number of people that's in there, but I want to give all the credit to Gary as well. He's been working with me on this and has indeed been the one that has created the brand guidelines and has also kind of written up that background paper in terms of kind of how this was put together. So I want to give him the credit for that as well.
Well, it's very kind of Jennifer, and I'm sure very appropriate. So thank you for mentioning that. If nobody's got anything else, we'll just, Fiona, if you don't mind, go to the roll call.
Yep. The recommendations in the report, as Jennifer set out, are that one, that members review the proposal for the brand identity and guidelines, which I think has been done. And secondly, that the IJB approve and formally sign off the new brand identity and guidelines for implementation from January 2023. So I'll come to each voting member individually. Shamin Akhtar.
Agreed.
Do we have Lachlan Bruce back in the meeting?
Yeah, I've managed to get my mic working. Again, apologies for that. Approve, and it would have been approved on the last paper as well.
That's great. Thank you,
Thank
Lachlan. Elizabeth Gordon.
Approved.
Fiona Ireland.
Approved.
Carol McFarlane.
Approved.
Peter Murray.
Approved.
And Val de Souza.
Excellent work. Approved.
Thank you, Val. And that's the recommendation approved unanimously, Chair. And we can move on to the last item, which is the Chief Social Work Officer Annual Report for 21-22, presented by Judith Tate.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Judith, for preparing this report and sharing it with us. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to read it. It's very thorough and very interesting, but I'll hand over to you to summarise it.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. So pleased to report to present the report for 21-22, which fulfills the statutory requirement for the Chief Social Work Officer to produce an annual report on the activities and performance of social work services within East Lothian, that obviously include those that are delivered within the Health and Social Care Partnership. The format of the report follows the guidance set out by the Scottish Government's Chief Social Work Advisor in terms of arrangements for governance and accountability, service quality and performance, resources and workforce. And the report's topped and tailed with sections on particular achievements at the start and conclusions that highlight the kind of key challenges for the profession. The reporting timeframe covers the second year of the pandemic, and the report details the continued impacts on the lives of people who require social work support and intervention. And I ask members to note the increase in vulnerability and the risks and the changing nature of these risks across the different groups. The report also highlights the impact on the social care and care services that provide essential care and support to people who are being supported to live in their own home or are being cared for away from home. Whilst I'm aware that a number of the achievements set out have already been presented and discussed within the IJB and the strategic planning arena, this report is an opportunity to recognise in one place the breadth of the social work role and function across what is referred to as adult services and where they contribute to the delivery of the strategic priorities of the IJB. The professional social work task is not always visible and not as easy to define maybe as other professional roles. So I'm pleased to have the opportunity to share some of the many achievements from 21-22 that are firmly aimed at improving the safety, the experiences and the outcomes of those who are being supported or cared for by social work services. And this, as my colleagues know, is testament to the commitment and resilience of the social work workforce and to the support of their managers and leaders. We know that wanting to make a difference to the lives of vulnerable people remains the driving reason to choose social work as a profession. And it's important that we do all we can to ensure it continues to be an attractive and rewarding as a career. There are many changes ahead for all areas of social work in terms of the potential changes to accountability and governance arrangements. And some of these opportunities clearly are there to bring opportunities for further improvement. They also come with risks for a profession that may well become destabilised by uncertainty and the risk of a loss of profile. Chair, I present the report to the IJB for consideration and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. And can I start by just acknowledging not only the professional way in which you presented it and the work in the report, but the work that goes on, as you rightly identify, for a lot of people with no real knowledge of the effort that goes into this on a daily basis and the support that's provided to vulnerable people, often by the workforce that provide the services you've outlined in the report. So I want to just acknowledge that. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll open it up in case there may well be others on the call that have already received it elsewhere, Judith, I'm going to assume. So I will ask if there's any questions, even though that may be the case.
Yes, it might just be useful to point out we ran a members briefing session for elected members prior to the report coming to East Lothian Council at the end of October. So yes, this is a little after the event. So some people around this virtual room will have had access to the report. Thanks, Peter.
So whilst people are maybe just thinking about it, I'll pose a couple of questions if I can, Judith. One's maybe not easy to answer, but in page 22 of the report, you make reference to an ethical commissioning strategy will ensure that services best reflect the NCS principles. I know this is a reflective report, but I just wonder what going forward do you see that changing the way in which things are done at present, if at all?
I'm trying to find that now in here.
It's the first paragraph on page 22. And it's the second sentence, begins with an ethical commissioning strategy will ensure that services best reflect the NCS principles.
Yes, and as you can imagine, Peter, I've written this report in conjunction with the support of my colleagues that are around the room. So I think I will, at this point, defer to Laura to come in and add some colour to that statement, if that's possible, Laura.
I think that was just aligned with the commissioning strategy that is coming to the SPG, I think, in January. So there's a commitment in there to ensure our continued ethical commissioning and also to be responsive to what particularly came out the Feely report in how we commission services moving forward. So yeah, that's what I'm assuming that refers to. And it's not actually we're pretty good on our commissioning, so we're not too far away from ethical commissioning. In fact, I think we're very good. So it was just realigning that commitment there.
Okay, thank you. And if Val and Elizabeth can bear with me, I've got one more question just before I come to you since I started the ball rolling. Page 21, Judith, at the second last paragraph, it says services refined the use of eligibility criteria for assessments, assessing service provision against critical and substantial risk and accelerated efforts to reduce reliance on providers by supporting alternative community provision. what kind of examples might have featured there, Judith, by way of that variation in how services may have been provided compared to how they were?
Okay, I'll start this off, and I'll ask Matt to come in to support that, or Ian, who's got his hand up. I think what we recognised this time last year was that there was work to do for us to be confident about the consistency of the application of how we make decisions about access to services when we were faced with a very significant reduction in the availability of those services. So the first part of that sentence was really a lot of work, as supported by our lead officer from the Adult Support and Protection Committee, to help us understand how we could improve the consistency, both internally and with our providers, of really understanding that the same thresholds were being applied in making decisions about those people who are most at risk. And I think that's been an area that has continued with really good and important work that served us well. The second part of the sentence, I think it'll be that reflect the work that we've undertaken with VCEL, as well, to support different approaches to how need can be met. It's challenging us to think about whose responsibility and duty it is to meet need, and how we engage with our communities to help to shift some of the more often traditional ways of thinking. I need a service and the service needs to come from here. I think what we've experienced over the past 2 years means that we've really had to re-examine that quite significantly. And that sentence really is a reflection of, I think, the work that started last year and is continuing with our third sector colleagues. But I see that Ian's hand shot up as I started to speak, so he may well wish to come in support of that.
Yeah, just before you do, I'll just pose a question for you to think about, and you may not wish to respond to it, but there's often concern about what they call, I think, in the future report, the postcode lottery. So does the consistency of assessment, do you think, fit how others may view us if we were to compare ourselves across the borders of the respective local authorities? I'll just leave that hanging for you to think about and maybe come back to if there's time.
Okay.
Ian, did you want to come in, or shall I go
So
to
I think Judith covered it very well, but again, just to give some direct examples, we do have work with VCEL, Maureen's on the call, both for community support for discharge, and what we implemented last year, which was a real saver for people who were in need during a provision failure over Christmas, was that VCEL were actually able to get in touch with about 15 people who were going to have no provision at very short notice over Christmas, and we were able to use some of the carers funding to actually do direct offers to patients, to clients or service users, whoever want to badge people, but to say, actually, here are alternatives to somebody coming to do that visit, and here's how we can facilitate that for you. We've also got quite a comprehensive discharge to assess and rehab focused approach, which is allowing us to reduce the traditional offer in terms of what we have for packages of care. And very, very recently, we've introduced a new in-reach service within the Royal Infirmary and the Western. And that's fascinating to see our experience. So as opposed to waiting for that discharge point and the assessment at that point, actually picking people up at point of admission and starting to work out what their baseline is and how we can get in earlier and give alternatives that aren't just simply either package of care or care home for people. But the VCEL examples are really practical one where we offer something as a genuine alternative. We have also looked at other models around patient contacts, so just phoning people instead of doing hospital to home visits as well. That's been really effective. In answer to your second question to Judith, so we can all benchmark ourselves, and we did this last year during the provision difficulties, and we still experience, we're all able to benchmark ourselves against the COSLA guidance for accessibility criteria, and we follow that. But once that guidance is applied, what we then have is a risk assessment and the reality of what we can provide. And postcode lotteries are difficult because care at home is a sector which is governed by people who walk and the provision that is in your local town. So areas across East Lothian, Musselburgh is a very different place to North Berwick, and as such the provision is different. We've seen through the provisioning work, Peter, that care home provision in North Berwick is significant and in PSG is non-existent. So while there isn't any, I would be worried about a postcode lottery in terms of how we assess and use COSLA guidance to consider someone's needs. I do think there is then just a reality of what provision is available for how we meet those needs. And that's where variation does come in. We do that within East Lothian in a risk-based approach. So we RAG rate every client on assessment, both for community and hospital. And we still have more work to do in aligning those processes, but I don't think, I do think we're probably ahead of some other areas in terms of having that consistently across all of our older adults.
And I think what you've outlined in your answer, Ian, is the very thing I've tried to tease out, which is that my personal view, that is only my personal view, is that it's not fair to say there's a postcode lottery, so therefore wave a magic wand and everybody can have equal treatment. There's realities to be brought into it that are practical. And I think we need to tease out those practicalities which form part of the evidence gathering, which may already have happened or will yet happen within the committees that are hearing evidence on the NCS. That was my point. So thank you for putting me right on that, Ian. Val, you were first, I think.
Hi, thanks. Judith, thanks very much for this. It's a great report, excellent work to you and the team. And I think it is very difficult in senior social work post to sometimes describe what the task entails. So I have a couple of comments more than questions. One, I guess, is really congratulating the work around early intervention and prevention. And it links to community and some of the comments that have been made here today, and also links into the sort of eligibility sort of argument discussion. And I think that worry about entitlement and National Care Service and affordability. So I think there's a number of things here that are worthy of noting. The workforce challenges, Judith, I think are also probably worth noting. In terms of retention, recruitment, social work, workforce, and I just think you know, it's not always a very visible, but it's not always a very valued, if you like, if I can use that word, workforce either in some respects. But sometimes I think even in relation to the work that we do, that I think maybe folk are not always aware that when we're talking about the pressures around delayed discharges, that sometimes how that gets translated into social work allocations in a team might be that the public protection issues and public protection, adult protection, child protection, and the pressures on delayed discharge can be in competition with each other in terms of priority. And I think that's something that people should be aware of. Sometimes I think maybe folk think there are different teams out there, but those priorities have to be made every day in relation to a social work team. So I think just wanted to make that point because I think they are significant. They're different kinds of risks. And I think there are different kinds of pressures that are in the team. And some of that is also around making decisions about community versus hospital needs and ventures. So it's complex. I wanted to ask about disability and child protection, Judith, but just not a question, probably not ask, but comment. I've been aware recently that, and I think it's probably a post-pandemic thing, that children with disabilities in particular have had a particularly hard time. And often I think we work in silos in children's services, but it's just to really make the point that I think the whole protection thing in relation to the disability world is probably as important, if not more important now than it has been in quite a long time. So if you want to comment, that's absolutely fine. But other than that, I just want to make that comment. I could go on, I won't. It's just because the social worker in me coming out, folks. But I guess from an IJB point of view, if you can think of now or in the not too distant future, anything that the IJB can do to value, support, comment on anything to do with the social work agenda, just from an IJB point of view, could be about valuing or feeding back or supporting in any way. I think I, for one, would be very happy to hear about that. So thank you very much, Judith and team.
Okay, thanks very much, Val. Always happy to have other social workers around the table. I'd come back on a couple of those comments, Peter, if that's all right. I think the workforce and where and how they work is really important. We are in for children and families social work. We're in a recruitment and retention crisis, absolutely. And I noted that the SSSC's report, workforce report from last year, had East Lothian Council as the second highest in December of last year, having social work vacancies next to Edinburgh. So that I appreciate that's a changing, position month on month, and that's both adults and children involved in that. I think you're right, and I think some of that is about visibility. It's about visibility of the metrics that people pay attention to, and the metrics around our pressures in acute settings and health settings are very visible, and they're very visible to ministers. The metrics around other aspects of social work are less visible, and you're absolutely right, in and around the protection world, whether it's child, adult, or public protection, they're less visible, and and therefore the risk is they are the pressures are there and unrecognised. I would argue that I think within our partnership, there is, important recognition of the social work role and function. And certainly Fiona and I have regular meetings to look at how we raise that profile, we keep that profile, we help staff understand that they are valued. And certainly Matt has led a really significant piece of work with Iris on looking at the kind of reimagining really social work, and that's led to some of the really important performance improvements, but it's also provided the social work staff with an opportunity to say, this is what we do, this is what we are good at, this is what's really important, and how we add value into partnership working that other people don't do. They have other important roles and functions. This is the social work role and function. So as a profession, we've long not been very good at that. And I think this has been an opportunity to really just showcase and articulate what does social work bring to the table. And it's an essential kind of integral part of what we do. You've asked about what the IJB could do. I think sometimes it's about having those metrics to consider what is the performance measures that actually would bring it to the top of the pile that gets it some visibility. I think we've done that most recently in terms of showing the improvements in the waiting times for assessment, the work that Matt's been leading. But I think there's probably more that we can do across other aspects and domains of the adult social work agenda that would support that routinely with the IJB. And my last point would be, yes, I agree, children with disabilities are probably the most vulnerable group, and where that sits and fits with child protection, I think has in some places not had sufficient focus. I'm quite confident here with us that our team is on that in the children's world, but that crossover into younger adults with disabilities and that intermediate move between child and adult protection for older young people, I think is a point for the Public Protection Committee to take note of. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
Yeah, I just wondered, Judith, pick up, because I think Val's made a really interesting point, and it's good to hear, and Matt will say something more about it in a minute, I'm sure, but it's good to hear about the work in terms of metrics that might help facilitate greater knowledge and understanding, and I suppose it's not a competition, but you're right to point towards the public awareness of the acute world more so than the social work world. That's a fact. I watched First Minister's questions today, and every leader was asking the same questions on health. Generally, there was elements of care in it, but it was mostly health. But I suppose my question back to you, Judith, and for you to think about, and maybe just you can email me at a later date, would a development session on the work of social work for the IJB members be something that would be of value? But I'll leave you to consider that, Judith, and I'm more than happy to work with Fiona on that and see whether or not that would actually open up the knowledge and therefore open up the debate in amongst the IJB membership about the work you do. So you can give that some thought. Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I'm going to let Matt come in just in case he's got points. He raised his hand. If it's not Matt on any issues that have been raised, I will let Elizabeth come in, but I'll give you the chance to comment on what's been said just in the preceding minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It was mainly to pick up on the point that Val was raising about how we balance the various tensions in the system, particularly between the ones that we get up every morning and deal with straight away, adult protection and delayed discharge. So they're the two bread and butter items that we get to straight away. But I think what we've managed to achieve, particularly over the last year, is to not go down a process of saying we don't silo staff into saying you're dealing with this aspect and you're dealing with that. It's really trying to create and we're lucky, I think, in East Lothian we have a scale in which we're able to do this, but we really try and upskill all our staff to be able to deal with all of these topics and items and we don't create teams that just respond to certain things. So everybody is aware that they have a role in all of these various aspects. And a really good example of that is, for example, our chart process. So the chart team manage care homes, but they manage discharges from hospital to care homes, they manage care home reviews, and they manage adult protection issues that arise in care homes. And that gives us a really coordinated and sophisticated approach to our work in that area without necessarily putting people into certain silos. So it's just to give that as an example and say it's something we really focus on, being a resilient service that can flex as we need to. But more widely, Peter, I think the points you make are really important, and it would be good to try and have a space where we can demonstrate both the changes and improvements we've made, but also the role and contribution that we make to the wider partnership. And some of it is actually about saying there are solutions to some of these issues that are faced in acute settings at an earlier stage in the community. And we look at things like unmet need. The majority of unmet need is in the community, but the focus clearly is on the delayed discharge aspects. So how do we kind of shift some of that thinking about it? It gets harder and harder as the pressures in acute get greater and greater.
No, more than happy to facilitate that, Matt, if you and Judith think that of value, so you can let me know. Elizabeth.
Thanks. Following off what you said, Peter, about possibility of a development session, my question is definitely for my own development, really. So because I'm new to the IJB, this is the first social work report that I've heard. And I noted in the report that there's a need for more families to consider permanent fostering rather than adoption. And I understand the legal difference between the two, but I was just wondering from the child's perspective, what's the difference in terms of fulfilling the promise for those children of permanent fostering versus adoption?
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. So the promise is really challenging us to ensure that children, you know, where it is safe and where it is right to do so, remain connected and with their birth families, and those relationships that they have within that birth family are kind of nurtured and protected. And when children move through fostering and out the other end of that, the majority of them return to those family settings, and if we've not facilitated those relationships, then that makes the future life much more difficult. The reality is that fewer children are moving towards adoption because we are getting better at supporting children to remain within their family groupings. The kind of whole family well-being, whole family support approaches, and the promise is saying to us, you need to provide support to that family for as long as they need it and in a way that meets their needs. So it means then that the children for whom we have been unable to meet, but to have them safely rehabilitated or looked after at home, are the older ones that then go through towards permanent fostering rather than baby adoptions. So the notion that we have, we have a lot of people coming forward to be adoptive parents, but actually the pattern, the trajectory really is that we are looking for a much more of a partnership approach. Very difficult ask for families, for foster families, not to suddenly take a child into their own world and bring them up. We're wanting them to do that whilst recognising that the birth family remains there as a partner, and that's a different ask entirely. So it is not an easy task. It's not an easy ask, but it recognises that the promise is saying to us, you need to recognise the importance of this child's birth family links because they'll be with them forever, and the chances are they will return to those, apart from a small group for whom adoption is absolutely the right thing. But we have more than enough adoptive families. We don't have anything like enough foster families. Hope that's clear enough.
Thank you, that's really clear, thanks.
That was a good question, Elizabeth. Shane.
Yeah, no, thank you, Judith. Thank you, Matt, for the report. We had this as a council's briefing and ADAC council as well, but I think it really still needs that time to go through, and we could spend the whole IJB going through it. But I just wanted to kind of, first of all, just to thank you and just to acknowledge the considerable contribution made to the Health and Social Care Partnership right through the port. There's areas where it supported its work, and especially around, Matt, your work around the adult social work services assessment allocation waiting times. And the most important part of that was like improving the outcome for that person, for their carer and their family, you know, that making that difference to that whole family. And that's really, really, really important. And the other two areas were around Val, you've mentioned about the learning disability services, where people struggled the most was, you're absolutely right, was in that area, and the support for carers as well. But I think one of the, maybe an ask for the IJB would be, how do we make sure that we are you know, kind of valuing that and articulating that, the important role that social work plays, and whether it be in our press work or our messages to staffing, that, you know, social work staff have a really important contribution that they are making to health and social care, and how we get that across and acknowledge that. Because I think when you're getting on with the day job every day and you know, improving those outcomes, we need to, as a health and as an IJB, make sure we're giving them that recognition and valuing that. And that's something for us to go away and think about. But I mean, I've not even mentioned the voluntary sector or you know, community justice, drugs and mental health and alcohol. You know, we could spend the whole day, but really, you know, it's really, really making a significant contribution. And I think with that, all those loud voices that are always in acute, we have to make sure that we're pushing, you know, this area of work and the kind of the contributions like higher up on the agenda as well in every way that we can.
Yeah, and also that, Shameen, Judith, do we come back in?
Just to say thank you for that, Shameen. And yes, I mean, this is a big report with a lot of information in it. It's a bit overwhelming. So, you know, if there are ways of chunking that up or having briefings or development sessions that look at particular areas of social work, that may well be more helpful. I think there's something about understanding what social workers do and where the commonality is of that profession and how it sits and fits across children, adults, justice, older and younger adults, that is helpful for people to understand. So I think something on the commonality and then something on the kind of specific thematic areas that are certainly being delivered within the partnership would be helpful. I would also make a plea that we consider at some point in the next year a session that highlights children's social work, so to get people thinking about what the relationship and link is between the services that are delegated and those that are not, but actually are still inextricably linked with adult services. So a few ideas of work I've given myself and others, but I think would be worth exploring. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose speaking on behalf of everybody other than Val, who's really got experience in this, although she's a non-exec member of NHS Lothian, she straddles both sides. So maybe on behalf of Elizabeth and myself, I do think that more exposure to the work that you do would be really helpful. And I would say that for Carol and Lachlan as well, in the opposite regard, in terms of acute. So you know, maybe we can get a quid pro quo going here where we can share experiences, and that way the IJB will be the benefactor of that, because the understanding of each challenge or the challenges of each of those partners will be known, and I think we'll be able to make more informed decisions as a consequence. Val?
Yeah, just following on from Shameen and Judith, I mean, it's just a good conversation, and it's really worthy. It needs the conversation. Just following on, I wonder if we could, because it is an annual statutory requirement that we have the Chief Social Work Officer's report, I wonder if as an IJB we could actually write back via Judith as chair and as an IJB and just say that we've had a fulsome discussion, that we're very supportive, that we recognise or whatever, and find a form of words that basically, you know, just messages, but actually gives the profile to the social work professionals in our, and actually I'm not bothered about structure, so it's to the whole social work staff. So I wonder, and their supports, I have to say, they're sort of the people who support them. It's not a professional thing, it's a service thing really, and it's about the impact on the residents of East Lothian, put it like that. But I wonder if we should put a note out, Peter, just a suggestion.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up with you, Val, outside the meeting. So let's have a chat about that and see where we can take it. If you're amenable to that suggestion.
I think staff would appreciate that. I think, you know, the kind of for main grade staff, their understanding of the machinations of council and IJB is probably not as clear as we might wish, but actually knowing that their voice has been heard, knowing that their service has been recognised, will always go down well and will always be appreciated. So yes, I would say yes, please.
Good. Okay, well, Val, you and I can pick that up, and we'll do that. We'll let Fiona know we're going to conclude that. Fiona, if that's okay with you. Fiona, yeah, so many Fionas.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that brings us neatly to the end of today. This report's only for consideration. I think we've given it quite good consideration, and hopefully, Judith, you at least recognise that, you know, we are with you in as an IJB in recognising the significant part of health and social care that you deliver. And it's not just about our acute colleagues. It's very much like an arrangement that merges the two together. And the more that there's integration across the spaces where that's appropriate, the better the people that are recipients will be. There's no doubt about that. So, Fiona Wilson, have you got anything to finish off with, Fiona, or are you happy just for us to conclude?
I'm happy for you to conclude. Thank you. Okay, well, thanks to Chris. Thanks to Jennifer, and thanks to Judith for today. I think it's been a good discussion, and we've given hopefully the green light for an identity, Jennifer, that will start to reflect better on what you've set out to achieve, and I look forward to that. And can I get a background first, please?
Certainly, yeah, no problem.
Thank you. All right, well,
Peter, just confirming that's the recording stopped.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
I think this will be the last time we're together, so